Okay, thank you, everybody. Welcome to the Lehigh County Authority Board of Directors meeting of July 25th, 2022. This meeting is being recorded to be available digitally, visually, and virtually, and in person using Zoom. So we can now begin with a roll call of the Board of Directors, please.
All right. Morning, everyone. Roll call of the board. Brian Noggle.
Here.
Scott Bieber.
Here.
Dick Bonner.
Here.
Norma Cusick.
Here.
Ted Lyons.
Here.
Kevin Baker.
Here.
Linda Rosenfeld.
Here.
Jeff Morgan.
Here.
Amir Famili. All right. We have 8 board members present, so you have a quorum.
Okay, thank you very much, Liesl. Before we begin reviewing the agenda, I'd like to make some announcements. Once again, for the 37th year in a row, we have received the Government Finance Officers Association Certificate of Achievement for Excellence in Financial Reporting for our 2020 financial report. At the same time, they also award a financial reporting achievement to present it to Ed Klein and his team for a job well done. So thank you very much for all the financial reporting that's being done and the good work of the teams.
Team works very hard at that.
Yeah, a lot of effort, I'm sure. I'd also like to announce an award given to Andrew Moore recently from the Roy F. Weston PA Water Environment Association for excellence running our industrial pretreatment plant. And one more, the water filtration plant was awarded a director's award from the American Water Works Association for 15 years of participation in the Partnership for Safe Water program, which means the filter plant operates at a level that exceeds regulatory requirements. So again, job well done by everybody. Keep up the good work. We appreciate it. And so do our customers. All right, yes, thank you. All right, let's review the agenda. Our packages were mailed out. I see Amir has shown up there. Hi, Amir. Our packages were mailed out in advance and also provided to the board of directors digitally and is also available on our website. Let's review that agenda and a need for executive sessions. Liesl?
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have no changes suggested for the agenda today. However, I would like to request an executive session following the close of the regular meeting to discuss personnel.
Okay, and that information for that Zoom meeting is a separate meeting and it was mailed out this morning by Liesl to all the board members. So if you need to reference that, we'll give you a little break between the meetings to be able to log in next meeting. All right, moving on to approval of the minutes from the July 11th, 2022 board meeting.
I'd like to make one suggestion. In the very last paragraph on the first page, Bradley is referred to with an ampersand. That's incorrect. So I'd like the ampersand removed. With that change, I make a recommendation that the meeting minutes of July the 11th be accepted.
A second.
I'll second that. This is Norma.
All right, well, I heard Norma second that. So Dick's made the motion and Norma second that. Any questions by anybody? All right, all in favor say aye.
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 I
Any
abstain.
opposed?
Ted Lyons abstains. That's
Okay,
right.
thank you, Ted.
Scott also abstains.
Thank you, Scott, for mentioning that. Thank you. Okay, ayes have it. Meeting minutes approved with that one change. Moving on, it's now the opportunity for anybody from the public to talk about any items that are not on the agenda. Are there any comments to be made?
No, thanks, Brian.
Yep. No, thanks, Brian.
Hi, Jenny and Brian. Anything else? Okay, moving on to action discussion items. We have 2 items under finance and administration. The first one is the LCA strategic plan 2022 quarterly progress reporting is the TAN documents in the board package, and digitally it's pages 6 through 10.
Brian, before we get into that one, I should have asked this in advance, but we do have a guest here from Concord Financial to talk about the second finance and administration item. Chris Gibbons is here with us. If he had a need to leave to get to another engagement, we could flip-flop those two agenda items, but it's really your call, Mr. Chairman, and also we might want to ask Chris about his preference.
Let's do that. I have no problem in switching the agenda priorities here. Go ahead.
Lisa, thank you. Brian, thank you. It's completely up to you. My time is yours. So.
Okay, well, let's switch it. I think that would be more expedient. All right, so switching the agenda order, we're going to go through resolution number 7, 2022-1. It's the Suburban Water Division financing. Staff is seeking approval. That is the salmon documents in the board package and digital pages 11 through 16.
Great. So I guess I've already kind of introduced the topic with noting that Chris is here with us. I believe the board has met Chris Gibbons a few times before. And Chris and Ed have provided a short presentation to go through the details of the financing. So I'm going to share my screen and get that up for everyone. Okay. Chris and Ed, you want to take it away?
Okay, good afternoon once again. Nice to be with you all. Appreciate your support over the years. The purpose of this afternoon's discussion is to consider a resolution adopting a borrowing of $12,255,000 of a water revenue bond to 2022 series. You might recall in the past financing projects, we've looked at both bank loan and bond issue financing, and then have recommended to the authority whatever the best course of financing of those two options are. We did the same thing this route as well. We went to 36 different banks. We had only 2 banks that responded with 3 different proposals. When I went back to 3 or 4 different banks to find out why they didn't propose when they said, 24 hours before the due date that they were going to, the 2 answers I received were, number 1, the repayment schedule that we had was back-end loaded and they didn't like that. And that, of course, then tied into the second reason was interest rate risk. Banks are a little skittish right now to committing monies for a fixed period of time, whatever that period of time is, when they anticipate that they would have to reprice it or possibly reprice it sometime in the future when, in fact, they wouldn't have that opportunity with the authority's financing.
Questions? Will you please explain the back-end loading issue?
Yes. The way that the debt structure, actually, let's go to the last page. That might be a little easier to follow.
Okay.
Lisa, can we go right to the graph of debt service? I think it's like the 3rd slide.
There you go. Okay. So what this represents is a bar graph of 3 different things. The blue bar is existing water debt service. As you can see, reading just left from right, the existing debt service is approximately $3 million through approximately 2031. And then, as you can see, the blue bars from that point on are decreased from a debt service payment below $1 million. The orange bars represent the proposed debt service for the new 2022 issue, which essentially means that it's interest only from 2023 through about 2031. Then on 2032, you can see in the orange, the debt service, the principal starts to be ramped up, if you will, to approximately $2.6 million. And then the principal is completely repaid from 2033 through 2042. That's the back end load. So essentially there's no no principal being paid between now and 2032, but the entire load of 12.2 million is paid off in its entirety by 2042.
What's the big spike in 2032?
In 2032, in this case, the big spike would be, we actually are repaying a portion of the principal in that year, that fiscal year 2032, to be essentially, if you look at next line you would care about is the total water debt service, which is the green line. Essentially, the blue plus the orange line equals the green line. So that's I was trying to make the payments level through 2032, and that's the way to do it.
So is there any reason why we structured debt this way?
Yes, it is.
Yeah, essentially what we wanted to do was to avoid a bigger increase. If you remember back when we did the capital plan, we talked about a need for about 3 to 5% additional revenue need, where we thought some of it would come from volume, some of it would come from rates. And what I was trying to avoid was borrowing $12.3 million and paying principal and interest right up front on it. And instead allowing that to sort of phase in so that we didn't have to adjust the rate structure to accommodate the additional principal. So it's just a way of allowing the revenue to catch up over a period of time where it wouldn't cause us any harm in terms of big adjustments.
So then I'll let you all go. So the structuring of the debt this way, is there a penalty we pay in terms of interest rate for structuring it this way?
The penalty, yes, there is, because you essentially are postponing repayment of principal to a certain extent. The penalty, I wouldn't say be great. I think the penalty right now, if you will, is market. Where interest rates going? And I think that's part of the reason why we're here today versus sometime in the future, trying to get in here as quickly as we could.
So we had 2 responses out of
36, yeah, which gives you an indication, the credit rating of the authority, which is a very good credit rating. The initial interest that we had from all the various banks led me to believe we're going to get 5 or 6, and that's what I led Ed to believe as well. And when I called them all the day before or the day of, they told me the reason that I mentioned before.
Yeah, there was kind of less response than I thought there was going to be honest with you, but that's just an indication of, I think, what's happening in the market, especially on the bank institutional side. The one thing that was real sure to us was going the bank route was going to be better than going the bond in terms of interest rate. So that was why we ended up going with the Fulton side.
And actually, that's the good news. The bad news is we got 2 proposals. The good news is the proposal we received from Fulton Bank was better than what we could have obtained in the bond market anyway. So we are still getting the best of what we can out there in the market.
And obviously, these banks are solid 5-star banks.
They're solid banks,
Thank you.
Sure. Thank you for the question. I think that actually kind of got to the punch of what I wanted to describe. I would just go back to page 2, Lisa, if we could, just to give the highlights of the proposal. There it is. Okay, so as I mentioned, it's $12.225 million, a 20-year term. The whole debt service is paid off within 20 years, which is a shorter time than the existing debt service of the authority. We have a fixed rate of 4.04% for 10 years, variable thereafter, but interest rate will never go any higher than 5.75, and that is the debt service structure that I use to compare in the bond market. I said in a worst case scenario, we pay 4.04% for the first 10 years, plus we have the ability to draw this money down over 3 years. Think about it like a credit card, where essentially you're only paying interest on the money that you drew down. That's an incredible amount of interest savings the authority realizes because of that number 3 there, 3-year drawdown. So once you take all those facets into account, and assume a worst case scenario where the interest rate goes to 5.75% from year 11 through 20, we're still better off with the Fulton Bank loan than we are with the other alternatives that are out there.
And quite frankly, that's not all that far-fetched when you look at what the possibilities are and what the Fed might do given the current rate of inflation and their response to it as well. I mean, I keep hearing I've actually heard 1.25. I heard 0.75. So the market's going to change dramatically depending on what the Fed does. And that's going to be very short time for that.
I also would add that, let's say we're all wrong about our prediction of interest rates. If this loan is prepayable anytime, you could refinance it, or quite frankly, what you'd probably do is go back to Fulton Bank and renegotiate those terms with them. And it gives you the flexibility to do that at a much lower cost than a bond issue.
And didn't Fulton, like a year or 2 ago, didn't they come through with a proposal for the authority?
They were involved, if you remember the 2018 series that had come due, they were the only bank to provide a loan to us back under the old concession agreement. And they also jumped in when we did the refinancing on the city side as well. convert that into 2021. So they've been a good partner for us over the last couple of years. And
Where
so,
are they from?
Actually, Fulton Bank's from Lancaster.
Lancaster.
Yes, but they have offices now in the Lehigh Valley,
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
kind of throughout the eastern side of Pennsylvania and other states as well.
Yeah, they do a lot of work in the eastern area.
It's the old Lafayette Ambassador, basically.
That's
And
correct.
bought it up, yeah.
They bought them, that's correct.
Lafayette Ambassador and Lafayette Bank in Easton goes back
Oh, yeah.
decades and decades, yeah.
So they've been a pretty good team player with us, and so I like the relationship that we forged with them and able to, I was sort of glad it was Fulton that really wanted to play with us on this one.
So just finishing off this sheet then, as I mentioned, it's prepayable at any time. We required in the term sheet that if you give us a proposal, you won't get any share of a debt service reserve fund, which is essentially money set aside in case the authority comes across tough times. But we said essentially we want proposals without that additional $800,000 or $900,000 of the borrowing that really essentially doesn't provide any value to the authority. We got it from Fulton. And as I mentioned, the proposal was the most advantageous received and it's better than the current bond market. Next page is just a sources and uses of funding. I know it's kind of in very small print, but on the left you can see $12,255,000 top left, and then where the money's going to. 2022 projects of $3.32 million, 2023 projects of $3 million, 24 projects of $5.855 million, and then the cost of issuance, which are further outlined below there, and then a miscellaneous rounding of $2,700. Effectively, what happens there is that money is left with the authority to use for capital projects.
So keep in mind that the numbers that you're looking at up there on 22, 23, 24 have come right from the budget and right from the cap plan. This right to the dollar, so.
The only several things I wanted to show on this page before we get off it was the question regarding column 2, which is the principal repayment schedule. As I said, that shows the back end load of that schedule. Column 4 shows those 2 asterisks to the right of them that essentially are saying, hey, that's the kind of interest that we will pay given the drawdown in 22, the drawdown in 23, the drawdown in 24. It's a significant amount of interest savings between now and 2025. So ultimately, what you are left with is column 8, which is your existing debt service, column 7, and your proposed debt service under this borrowing, column 6.
And this one will expire before the existing debt service will
That's
as
correct.
well. So I guess it's only 20 years. So.
When we do loans like this, do we collateralize it at all, or are there covenants? Or...
This would be all based on revenues. So there's no collateral that I know of for the equipment itself. They may write some of that into the indenture. I haven't seen the latest indenture, but it's usually based upon the revenues. And basically it comes down to be the equal position with some of the other debt holders.
Exactly. And it's, again, specifically for the suburban water revenues, no city revenues, no sewer revenues.
But there's no specific listing of equipment or something that they get to, I'll say, put in their pocket.
Your car's not on there, Ed, is it?
No.
So I was wondering.
No, it's not.
It is. Diesel's car might be on there.
That's the part of the financial part of the presentation. Are there any further questions I can ask or answer?
So what we are looking for is for the board to consider the terms that we've just aforementioned on this and approve a resolution for us to, I'm summarizing without going through the whole legal language, to allow us to continue our endeavor with Fulton Bank under the terms and conditions that we just talked about, and grant us approval to move ahead on this loan and hopefully close by the 17th of August.
Correct.
I move we accept the resolution number 7-2022-1.
Second.
Didn't get who was seconded that, please.
Ted.
Ted?
Ted, okay. All right, so we have a motion and a second. Are there any questions regarding resolution number 7/2022-1 for authorizing the issuance of a water revenue bond 2022 series for the suburban water system in the amount of $12,255,000? And you can read the rest of the words on that resolution. Let's have a voice vote, a roll call vote, please.
All right, roll call on resolution 7/2022-1, Brian Noggle,
Yes.
Scott Bieber,
Yes.
Dick Bonner,
Yes.
Norma Cusick,
Yes.
Ted Lyons,
Yes.
Kevin Baker,
Yes.
Linda Rosenfeld,
yes,
Jeff Morgan,
Yes.
Amir Famili.
Yes.
All right, thank you. That's 9 yes votes.
All right, very good. Good work, guys. Thank you, Chris, for your presentation, and Ed for your work on this as well.
Thank you.
All right. All right, let's move back to the first item on that Finance Administration LCA Strategic Plan 2022 quarterly progress reporting, the TAN documents in our board package, digital package pages 6 through 10.
All right, thank you. So as you know, last year, at the end of the year, we adopted or approved a new strategic plan. And I'm doing a quarterly report to the board of where we are on some of the most significant items that are outlined in the plan. So I do have a presentation today, a little different from the last time in that I want to focus on a couple of very specific items that are in the report and assume that you have read and absorbed the rest of the report. We can certainly answer any questions that you have about what's in the rest of the report. So let me go ahead and share my screen. Apologize for not being there in person today. By the way, I'm a little under the weather, so keeping my germs to myself. So again, this is our second quarter report for 2022. And just to remind ourselves of what we said we were going to be focusing on within this strategic plan, we adopted a new mission statement, a new vision statement, and then a variety of strategies within these 6 key areas, and all kind of working together as a comprehensive strategic plan for the next 5 years or so. Just to kind of blow it out a little bit further, you've seen this graphic before where we have the mission and vision and values driving these top 6 priorities. But within each of those 6 priority areas, we have a number of strategies. And what's not shown here is further in under each of these strategies, we have a implementation plan or activity list that we are striving to achieve. So it's a fairly comprehensive plan and covers a lot of different areas. We also have outlined some measures or ways that we're going to look at progress. And at our last quarterly report, just skip ahead real quick, we rolled out this key performance indicator dashboard that Mark Bowen put together for us. So this dashboard is an update from last quarter with updated information, and tried to cover in sort of a 1-page snapshot some key areas related to finance, which you hear about from Ed every month. So not going to go into detail there, but just to give us the quick snapshot of the key metrics of debt service coverage ratio and cash. We also have some safety metrics that we added. Since the last report, we did add the number of recordable injuries year to date, because that's the key metric. What we're trying for is 0. We've had 2 so far this year. And then the number of days since the last lost time accident or recordable injury is also on our dashboard. We have some employee metrics to share, and the vacancies that we have now, the 13 vacancies, this is very common across our industry and across the market right now to just have difficulty filling certain positions. But we're actively recruiting and encourage friends and neighbors who really believe in our mission to apply, and let's get those positions. We also report on environmental compliance with you every month with a operations report. So Andrew can dive into any of the details here, but I think we have talked before about the issue we're having with the Sand Springs wastewater plant that's driving our permit exceedances this year. That's kind of why we see that larger purple block here in this report. And then at the top of the dashboard, we have our asset management measures where we're looking at preventive versus corrective maintenance. And our focus is to drive the preventive maintenance program forward, which will have the long-term impact of reducing corrective maintenance over time. But we're also showing that we have a fair amount of work to do yet to develop the program in terms of having all of our activities recorded within our asset management program. So I hope this looks familiar to you. This is a dashboard we rolled out to you last time. We made a couple adjustments to it over the last couple months, but we'll continue to work on refining some of the measures that are missing and reporting back to you. So for today, just to go back, we had talked before about trying to hone in on what are the key things within this very large, comprehensive strategic plan. What are the key things we really want to focus on with the board and the activities we want to track? And so we went through the KPI dashboard. And for today, we really want to focus on two key areas, first being asset management and the second being process efficiency, because we've been really working hard on those and want to give you a sense of where those two are headed. And you can read the rest of the report and certainly happy to answer any questions on the rest of what's there. So getting into asset management, this is a really broad organizational approach that we're trying to develop. And our focus area for 2022 is really foundational, to develop a multi-year approach or a roadmap to develop our program. We have a lot of people working on asset management. Of course, we've been doing asset management for decades, since the beginning of time. You're always managing your assets, but to really develop a comprehensive integrated approach is what we're going for with this goal. And secondarily, kind of as a foundation to everything related to asset management, is tracking our maintenance activities in our standardized computerized maintenance management system, or CMMS. We're using a system called CityWorks, so we may hear that term thrown out. So for today, I want to focus just a little bit on the item or the milestone that's highlighted about developing that roadmap for our asset management program. That's where we've spent a lot of time this year. And since the beginning of the year, we've spent a lot of time with a team. We've developed a team internally from a pretty broadly across the whole organization, from operations, capital works, planning, IT, finance, et cetera. So working on bringing that team together and developing our understanding of asset management. And at the last quarterly update, we talked about reorganizing some of our maintenance leadership and focusing some staffing dollars there, which we've done. We now have those positions completed and in place. So that's been a good achievement for us. We've also spent some time learning about asset management from industry experts. Just as an example, at our June team meeting, we had someone from the pardon me, the American Water Works Association Asset Management Committee come to our team meeting, actually joined by Zoom, but facilitated a really great discussion about asset management and where we are today and how to move things forward. And from these conversations and learning about asset management, we're really beginning to assess our own gaps and our own capacity to develop this strategic asset management plan, and finding ourselves struggling to find the internal expertise and capacity to put all the pieces together. So that's part of the reason I wanted to focus on that today. And of course, we're focusing now on the work that we can achieve, and that's mostly in the technology area. So working with our CityWorks program and our GIS program to kind of roll out what we're doing on the technology side. So just kind of broad brushing where we've been focusing our efforts in the first 6 months of this year under asset management. And when we talk about assessing our internal capacity to put this plan together, we start looking at what are the industry best practices or how to develop an asset management plan. And this graphic has popped up a number of times. It's from the AWWA Asset Management Committee. And focusing on these 5 areas of asset management and starting at the very beginning about what is the current state of my assets? What is an asset? What condition are they in? A remaining useful life? All those kinds of key data points that we don't really have collected. And we've struggled internally to answer some of those questions. How do we want to define what an asset is? Or how do we want to standardize our condition assessment process? So that foundational stuff is really where we're struggling. And we need to have that before we would move on to some of the next areas, like defining a level of service, looking at risk, looking at O&M and capital programs and funding. So our assessment at this point, and really the key thrust I wanted to share with you, our assessment is that we need some help. And I think we knew that. That's why we had some staffing put into the budget for 2022, but wanted to kind of hone in on that a little bit more today. So developing a strategic asset management plan and those baseline questions that I kind of talked about on the last slide, just getting the focus, the internal focus on answering those questions has been a challenge. So we want to move forward. We talked about this before with hiring a director of engineering and asset management to provide that internal leadership of the program, just beginning to work on the job description for that. But we think that's going to be a 6 to 12 month process to recruit, fill that position, and have that person be fully on board and able to lead us forward. So we're also talking about the need for some external support so we can keep moving and bring some external expertise into the organization and fast track our progress, facilitate our plan development. So we've started to work on a request for proposals. We hope to release that next week and bring something back to the board, probably in the 3rd or early 4th quarter, so we can get moving on the plan development. Before I move on to process improvements, just want to stop there and see if there are questions or thoughts on the approach that we're taking, or even the challenges that we're facing with developing this plan. We have some people in the room too who have been active on it. Andrew, Mark, Chris, Ed, and some others. Phil, I think, is on the call. Any questions on where we are with asset management and what we're struggling with?
Yes, Lisa with Scott.
Hi, Scott.
Hi, the question about what is an asset? What is going into that question? When I think of assets, I think of all our plants and our pipelines. Why is that such a difficult question to address?
Well, that's a great question, Scott. And we thought it was an easy question too, until we started trying to answer it. And what it comes down to, and please give folks on the team jump in at any point and share your thoughts as well. But my take on it is that the foundation of it is what goes into the system. So the GIS system, the database structure that we're trying to build around asset management, you need to define at what level are you building those assets into the system. So just as a for example, is a pump station an asset, or is the building an asset, the pump of the asset, the electrical components of the asset? So how far down do we want to break it down into the component that you're managing through this program? And what's the threshold that you use? Is it a dollar threshold? Is it a maintenance exposure threshold? And those definitions are really important if we're going to ask folks on the technology side to build the database around how we manage the assets. And I'll just turn to maybe Mark and Chris and some others who've been struggling with those questions if you want to add anything.
Yeah,
That was spot on, Liesl. I would just add, it also provides some sort of direction for our maintenance staff to understand what needs to get captured in our system. So when they're replacing pumps and parts and tracking that stuff, there's some guidance from the asset management team on what needs to occur to, change out that asset in the system. So without having that right now, we kind of see everything changed out, from ladders and sinks and napkin holders. So we have to get some structure in place to provide direction to our maintenance staff.
I mean, for me, it's more about what do you go out and replace, or what do you go out and repair? And as part of that replace versus repair, if it's a repair item, then it becomes a preventative maintenance item that you can do work on over time to ensure that you get the longevity out of it that you need, versus, a hypo pump that's, a $400 pump off the shelf. We wouldn't waste a whole lot of time trying to rebuild the plastic tubing and stuff like that. We would pull it, chuck it, put a new one on. Is it an asset? I wouldn't necessarily call it an asset. I'd call it an inventory item, so just those definitions, those fine definitions that we have to kind of really get to before we develop the database, because once you set the database in stone, it's too hard to go backwards and try to re-implement or re-add items in that maybe won't fit in your definition of an asset.
Best practices was mentioned. Has someone else invented this wheel?
Absolutely.
Yeah, and we've talked to a few of those people, and every one of them is different.
Really?
Yeah, because it's all very system specific. I think the example that the gentleman we brought in from AWWA, Kevin, he worked with DC Water, and it took them a year to define an asset because they're so big. You know what I mean? No, I don't think it'll take us that long nearly, but it took them a solid year to define an asset so they could build their database structure so they could actually start tracking asset information. So, it really depends on where we start from, how we expect our system to run, and where we expect it to be in the future.
I've seen a couple authority audit reports, and I don't know where the number comes from, but I've seen $5,000 used as anything above that is determined to be a capital project, and so maybe that's an asset.
If I might to interject a little bit, I would like everybody to open their mind a little bit and forget about what the financial, coming from an accountant now. Forget what the financial world says, because in most of the financial world, they would use $5,000 as a de minimis to even put on the books. They would call that a capital expenditure. This becomes a whole lot more encompassing than what we would put in a fixed asset register, to almost get to where you're saying, if you're gonna do some type of maintenance on it, regardless of the value, you should be listing that in your register and working that into your program. So there's a big difference between the way the financial people call assets and what the asset management program would say is an asset to us.
Makes sense.
I would just kind of caution us to say that, so the question is, are there best practices? And the answer is definitely yes. But internally, we don't have that knowledge and expertise to really kind of walk through what's been done and worked really well at these utilities of our size and what makes sense for us. There's a continuum of options or best practices that have been put in place. So bringing that external help into the organization to help us kind of facilitate and make these conversations go faster, smoother, get to the result that makes sense in context with what's happening in our industry.
Lisa, say that again. Does that mean you're trying to engage outside sources to help you through this process, or you're not?
Yeah, we are. So that's the next step that we're planning to take now, is to issue some kind of a request for proposals from firms that do asset management for a living and bring that expertise into the organization, bring those best practices to us from, and looking at some case studies across the continuum of organizations our size or larger. So that we can develop something more quickly than we could otherwise do just asking ourselves these questions.
Right.
So that's was kind of an unplanned approach when we put the asset management project or concept into our strategic plan. We weren't sure what resources we would need. We knew that we needed some staff support, and we've talked about that some in the past couple of meetings, but wanted to float the concept to the board that we'll be going out for some external help, and we'll be bringing that back to you when we have a proposal to look at.
Lethal, how big is your team?
Internally, it's about eight or nine people. So, a bunch of them are here in the room. Andrew, Mark, Phil DePoe, Chris, Ed, and then there's Chuck Volk. He's not here today, but he's on the team as well. So it's broad. And then what we want to do is also kind of create some sub teams or morph it over into the operational world a little more and get those new maintenance folks who are coming on board to be a little more involved in the planning process, because they're the ones who ultimately manage the maintenance on our assets.
Lisa, when we discussed the budget for the year, you had initially proposed hiring people at that time, and I think the board said it's a placeholder, but we were looking for you to do certain things and checking with others and best practices, and not trying to reinvent the wheel. And it sounds like you've exhausted those things that we've asked you to do, and you're now coming back with a request for maybe hiring people and studying this some further.
Well, Brian, if I could just kind of refresh your memory. Also, we did bring that back to you at the end of the first quarter, our staffing assessment. So we had we weren't sure about this director level position, if that was the right move for us to staff that right away. And through discussion internally and with the board and looking at best practices, we opted to reallocate those budgeted dollars more into a maintenance focused position for this year. But we received the board's direction and support for filling that director level position either later this year or within the 2023 budget. So we do want to move forward with that. We've already kind of been down that road and had that conversation with you, letting you know that we are moving that forward, but we also see the need for some external help as well.
Okay, and if we want to get into more discussion on this, I think we can do that in executive session since we're talking about personnel. One final thought, I'm just trying to address the issue of what is an asset. I just look at it as something that can affect the delivery of service, the efficiency of the system, or the quality of the product that we deliver. So, ladders is not going to do it. A washer is not going to do it. But things that would detract from our ability to perform our services are those things that I would consider assets. Okay, let's. What else? Continue on with your presentation.
Yes, thank you. Glad we broke there and had some good questions. The next area to talk about is our process improvement area. And this was another focused discussion that we had with the board last year during budget season about staffing versus other approaches. And so I wanted to give you an update of where we are with this. Specifically, the one focus area we developed was evaluating the long-term viability of our Munis system. That's our financial software that kind of dovetails into a lot of different areas: customer care, billing, inventory, purchasing, et cetera, payroll. Really assess what the next step is for enhancing that system. So I wanted to focus on where we are with that right now and give you a flavor of the next steps on that one as well, because that's a major initiative for this organization. We talked about this slide. I believe I presented the slide previously. About a year and a half ago, we started to develop this process improvement list of we call a wish list, basically all the different areas or the pain points that we were feeling within the organization that we felt like process improvement would help us. And when we looked at that, we really began to see this pattern that a very large portion of those wish list items are tied to our financial processes or administrative processes. So a lot of manual processes, a lot of spreadsheet-based financial calculations that happen outside of the system. And the root cause is really within our financial software that we have, this Munis program. And just to give you a little background, I believe I shared this with you before, the Munis system was implemented began in 2007, completed it in 2008. And as I'm sure you can imagine, we were a very different organization at that time. The system was customized somewhat around our current processes rather than at that time in the 2007 timeframe. So maybe the software itself wasn't customized, but the way we used it, the way we implemented the code structure, the way we set up the accounting processes were customized around what we were doing at that time frame, how we were managing the systems, not necessarily just implementing the best practices at that time. So today we're a much larger organization. We have grown significantly. The Allentown operation is a huge expansion of our footprint geographically, financially, employees, the whole gamut. So the way we were doing things in the past 15 years ago maybe doesn't work so well for how we're operating or need to operate today. And one of the biggest issues is that the way we set up the system at that time really inhibits the integration that we want to see with other systems. For example, the CityWorks system, which is where we're managing our maintenance activities, to be able to integrate our inventory or payroll with CityWorks so we can get cost of maintenance more automatically out of our maintenance management system. That integration is really difficult the way that we have this financial system set up. So we authorized in April Raftellus to do this needs assessment. I'm not going to go through all these steps. I just wanted to show you their scope of work, where they did a fair amount of work since April. In fact, they just were here a couple weeks ago to do a workshop with our team around the solutions that they are recommending. And so they've done a lot of work to really understand how we're using the system today, what our gaps are with our current processes, just really understanding where we are today and what's available out in the market. And then they came back with this solution, a set of solutions that we talked about just a couple weeks ago. They're going to be back next month in August to share a summary of that whole project with the board, so that you can get a little more detail than I'm giving you today about what they looked at and what their solution is. So we can look forward to seeing Raftellus at our meeting. I believe they'll be here on August 8th. Actually, they'll be on Zoom on August 8th to share that summary presentation. But wanted to kind of get us thinking about what this looks like. So we went into this project knowing that we have some challenges with our financial software, and we knew that there would be some kind of a project that comes out of the other end of this assessment to do process improvement. And what they're currently recommending is not moving away from our Munis system. It's a good system, it can meet our needs, but doing a full reconfiguration or full re-implementation of that system, which means going back to the drawing board and looking at business process, setting up the code structure the way it should be set up for us to operate the way we want to operate. It'll be a very significant organizational effort. They're estimating about an 18-month project and about $1.5 million to do that work over that time period. So that's a significant result that came from the work that we've done so far this year, and wanted to give you that result, at least at a high level, and then prepare you for seeing Raftellus here at the next meeting to get a little more granular with what they're recommending. So let me stop the sharing on that. And again, happy to offer Ed and Chris are kind of on the steering committee with me for that project, but there's again lots of participation across the whole organization. We had about 25 people involved in the Raftellus study in various forms of interviews, group interviews, large group meetings, discussions, reviewing the results. So very broadly contributing across the organization to that study. Ed or Chris, if you want to add anything to what I've shared so far?
Not surprised by what Raftellus found. I kind of thought along the way, at the end of the day, when you start to evaluate Munis, in its current state, it wasn't going to work. So obviously doing Band-Aids on it was out of the question. Implementing a new system is a whole different animal in terms of even the learning curve that has to take place after you do it and set it up. So to me, it made sense when we looked at the options that they came back and said, you know, the real problem was sort of the way it was implemented. Again, how many years ago that was, and business conditions are so much different now, and you're a bigger business on top of that. But essentially, it's a robust program, fully integrated, robust program that allows a lot of things to tie into it, which is what we want to do. So I think it made perfect sense that at the end, we're going to stop, get it right, get the practices right that fit the system to use it the right way, avoid some of the learning curve afterwards, because there should be some familiarity with what we're doing and how we do it. And I think it's a good solution and a good roadmap going forward. So I was kind of happy that it ended up that way. I think it makes sense, and I think it's a challenge for us to do it the right way. So
I'll agree with Ed and Lisa on this. I think it was probably the only choice moving forward. And I don't want to sleep on the fact that when we're done, the end users are going to see a very similar interface that they're used to. So there will be very little downtime, relearning time. It's going to be a big project. I was pretty happy with the price. I was part of a re-implementation of a piece of software for a large HVAC company in Southern PA 10 or 11 years ago, and it was twice that cost-wise. So I think our familiarity, the team's familiarity internally, and then moving forward with a piece of software that can ultimately become the centralized hub of data and information internally will be huge. So it'll actually be one version of the truth internally rather than disparate systems and spreadsheets, and it'll all be under one roof, which I think is going to be tremendous for the company moving forward.
You say one version of the truth.
Yes, sir.
Maybe you can implement that in Washington, D.C.
Good luck.
yeah, good luck with that one.
And just want to also recognize Mark Bowen was given the formidable task of trying to organize our process improvement approach with our wish list of 100+ items, and kind of going through all of that and identifying the munis and financial components to work through, I think was a good aha moment for us to kind of lead us down this path that we ultimately seem to be on. So we've learned a lot from his work in trying to look for process efficiencies. So, but we're not able to achieve them without doing something with the system.
So this is Amir. Just a quick question.
Yes.
Has somebody looked at after we went through this implementing this improvement, which by the way, $1.5 million is really cheap for kind of work you guys are looking for. Have anyone looked at the end result that say, okay, if we reach to this result, how does our system would look, and what kind of efficiency do we gain as far as freeing up the people, speed on execution? So have somebody look at that piece of the equation?
We haven't looked at it in a fine level of detail. We think that's really what the next phase of the project is going to do. So when Raftellus is, I'm kind of giving the preview. Maybe we don't even need them to come next month, but what they're planning to do, or what they're recommending that we do, is kind of break up the project into a couple phases. One of the phases, before we even get into the relationship with Munis and re-implementing, we spend a good 4 to 6 months doing business process review and understanding what the code structure should be and what the business workflows should be, so that we are ready. Once Munis is here and we're doing re-implementation, we need to be ready with all the code structure and all the back end stuff. So doing that business process evaluation in detail up front is what's going to get us, I think, closer to the answer that you're looking for.
Thank you.
Yep, you bet.
Any
So
other
there's
board?
Sorry.
So are there any other board questions? Okay, continue, Liesl.
That is actually all I had for the strategic plan quarterly update. I wanted to focus on those two areas in particular: asset management and the ERP needs assessment or the evaluation, because those are two areas where they're just so broad. The broad impact across the whole organization is going to be felt, and we're going to need not only external resources to support those programs, but we're also going to need broad internal support and teamwork to make both of those programs work. So there's a staffing component as well that we're going to have to think through. I wanted to highlight those in particular because we'll be coming back to you for resource requests, potentially for more resources this year to get these things moving forward, as well as when we share the budget assumptions for 2023, we'll fold in some of these items into it. So giving you sort of some advance warning and feeling of the scope of what we're talking about with these two major strategic initiatives. And then I guess I just offer the opportunity for any questions or discussion on anything else that's in the report that you received about the other areas that we're reporting on. Happy to talk about those. We just didn't plan a detailed discussion about those for today.
Liesl, I just want to go back, if I can, to the Munis.
Yes.
So what's the plan? Would Raftellus provide this as a package, or would they basically project manage Munis people to do the implementation?
So Raftellus has no ongoing relationship with us. Once they're done and they deliver the end report for this needs assessment, they're kind of done. So we need to then develop the next scope of work. It would make the most sense for them to continue on, but we will evaluate that internally if we're happy with their services and if there's other opportunities or other firms out there. But what we would be looking for, I think, to answer your bigger question, we would be looking for two relationships to do the project. One with a firm like Raftellus to facilitate and guide us through and to do contract negotiation with Munis, et cetera. And then we would have a separate contract with Munis, or Tyler Technologies as the parent company, for their implementation services, to have them dedicate the resources to doing the re-implementation with us. So we'll have those two relationships, two contractual relationships to run this project, and then an internal team of people who will be deeply focused on it for a period of time. Does that answer your question, Kevin?
Yeah, no, I was interested if it was going to be a two-level thing or a one-level thing, how that was going to work. Okay.
So just to be clear, what's included in the $1.5 million estimate?
What's included in the 1.5 is the contract with Raftellus or similar kind of consultant firm to do the facilitation and project management externally. The Munis scope of work for re-implementation. And then also we included in the 1.5 is a sum for some staffing support as well as equipment. So if we need to set up a team that's going to be focused 100% on, or let's say 50% of their time on this project for a period of 6 to 12 months, we're going to need some additional staffing support on a temporary basis to kind of lift those folks up and keep our business running in the meantime. So what that looks like, how that kind of all comes together, we don't really have those details, but we wanted to kind of include some funding for that. And as we move forward and refine it, we'll have a project approval phase for you all to look at the details.
Okay, thank you.
So it's supposed to be all inclusive. Short answer.
Up and running.
Yeah.
Okay, super. It's extremely important. So that's glad we're moving forward. Any other board comments, questions? All right, shall we move on to the next agenda topic?
Yes, that's great.
Okay, we have nothing under water or wastewater. We move on to monthly financial review, second board meeting of the month. Digital pages 17 to 28, and it was the white pages within our board packet.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen again for Ed this time.
Okay, let's take a look at the financial results for June. If we take a look at the summary, we're just starting at the top of the net income side for the month. Altogether, we're almost 561,000. Suburban water was on the positive side. Wastewater ended up on the negative side. And city division was positive. The truth of the matter is, when we looked at the Q2 forecast, we had a lot of numbers in front of us. So the closer you get to what you're looking at, the better the numbers turn out to be. And so we were pretty close in terms of actuals to forecast. There's not much variance to write home about on that in terms of net income. So if we're going down the line to cash flow statement, we were positive on suburban water, ended up a little negative on suburban wastewater. On the city side, we're 4 million on the negative side, but keep in mind with the debt service layout, you only make 2 debt service payments for the entire year, and one of them was in June. So it's good to see that even though they're negative, essentially the variance to forecast is positive, positive, and positive. So we had predicted that loan payment as well. In terms of where we are year to date, water, suburban wastewater, and city division are all on the positive side. Again, comparing to the forecast, year to date, there are very small variances, a little bit unfavorable in total. Cash flows, we're positive, we're negative on wastewater, and we're positive on the city. In terms of variance to forecast, suburban water is good, wastewater is a little bit down, mostly on the revenue side, and city division is good as well. So altogether, LCA is on the good side. Debt service ratios are all good, at 1.97, 9.06, and 2.15. So basically right in line with forecast, and obviously much higher than our minimum threshold of 1.20. So what we look like for the full year, well, we're going to be positive for all 3 funds. So that's going to make LCA a positive as well. Against budget, we're good on suburban water. We're down by $1.2 million in suburban wastewater. That will be mostly due to credits that are coming from last year on the wastewater municipal side. On the city division, we're on the good side. So as you look at the total, it kind of washes out a little bit, and we're only off by about $14,000 in terms of net income. Cash flows, all good, all positive. Water is good, wastewater is down, so despite the credits, we're making up some of it, but we're still going to be below budget. And on the city division, we're going to be good as well, and total LCA will be almost $1.8 million better than what we thought we were going to be. Debt service ratios all good. I mean, we're going above 2 even in suburban water. Certainly 1.86 on the city is a good number, and wastewater 9.47 is the only one that's a little bit below budget, but it's still well over 1.20.
Excuse me, Ed, where do you see our debt service for the suburban water going after we take on this new debt?
Suburban wastewater? Or you mean
suburban water, after we take on this new debt?
We'll probably add, I mean, we're around $3 million a year now. We'll probably add another, I think it was $400,000 since we talked about how we're backloading all the debt service. So it's really not going to I mean, the whole purpose of it was not to do damage to the rate structure that we kind of put out there to go for a long-term, I'll call it match with capital spending requirements. I'm answering your question.
Yeah, so you don't see the ratio changing that much then?
I think when I looked at a long-term projection down the road, let's just say 10 years from now, I think I was still at 1.8. So at no point in time does suburban water get in any harm on the debt service side, and even down the road in terms of cash days on hand, so.
Good, thanks.
Yeah, slightly different question. Talking about the bond issue and so forth and so on. What financial, make this real short and sweet, what financial information do the banks ask of you? And are they all pretty much the same, or their analysis the same? Just curious.
Yeah, basically, I mean, it was very similar to if I was doing a bond. I mean, the first thing is cash is king. And every one of them wants to know what your operating cash flow is going to be like. We kind of segregate the operating side from the capital side, because their theory is if you have trouble on the operating side, you're going to limit what you do on the capital side. Okay, so with that in mind, if we're getting into the neighborhood of being well above 1.20 in terms of debt service coverage ratio, we're the prettiest girl at the dance. And so far, they like what they see in the numbers. And even with cash somewhat building up, you're starting to create some opportunity for capital expenditures that might occur above a normal baseline and not have to worry about borrowing for it. So, and borrowing is risk. So they're okay to borrow you what you're asking for, but not want more. If that makes sense.
Thank you.
Okay. So in terms of suburban water, income for the month, again, variances are small. The group did a really good job forecasting this month. They were pretty much right on. And so only a $13,000 variance on the month, 3,000 unfavorable year to date. Where we look like for the year is we are going to be $363,000 better than budget in terms of income. The year-to-date graph below shows you the variances, and I was kind of laughing. I had to break this up into decimals because they were small enough, because I tried to do this in thousands. So there's really not much. I mean, 0.51, and then you go the other way, 0.49. So essentially negligible variances year-to-date in suburban water. In terms of cash flows, for the month, we were better by 126, so almost 40,000 in cash. Year to date, we're 271 better on $1 million of cash flow. And for the full year, we think we're going to be at 2.1 versus 400,000. So we're going to be up significantly in terms of cash flows. Variances on a year-to-date basis, small amount from debt service and financing, most of it a savings of $263,000 on lower capital, and then some of the other financial related interest income, we get some help by another 6. But the bigger variance is obviously on the CAPEX side. Looking at some of the, I'll call it the ratios, 1.97 on debt service coverage. We thought we'd be at 2. So not that bad. We're definitely better than 1.2, and we think we're going to be at 2.1, so that's going to be better than the target at 2.03. On the operating ratio side, we're above the target year to date of 1.25, certainly better than the internal target, and we think we're going to finish not much different, but 1.29, and that'll be good as well. Days cash on hand, we're at 217, which is good. That's certainly better than 180, and we think we'll finish at 261 almost. Again, as you look at the year-to-date operating revenues, year-to-date operating expenses to forecast, we're pretty much spot on. There wasn't any variances really to write home about, so that was good to see. CAPEX, we're at 83 versus 100, so we're a little bit lower where we thought we would be year to date. So what operating revenues look like so far is we're in line, and we think we're gonna finish better than budget, slightly lower than budget for the year in terms of operating revenues. Operating expenses, this is where we're making up some of that. We're in line with the year-to-date forecast. We think we'll be at 12.6 versus 13, so that's good. The expenses are gonna be lower. And then CAPEX, we're 1.3 versus 1.6. We think we're gonna finish the year at 4.6 versus 5.5. And what the cash balance looks like, 5.7 versus a forecast of 5.4. And we think we'll finish the year at 6.8, which is good. Just in terms of some of the trends, just looking at the bottom line moving average, we went from 1,252 to 1,268, which is a little bit up from last month. We're at 1,185 at the beginning of the year, or I should say 1,177 to 1,268. And compared to June of last year, we're 1,052. So there's been a little bit of increase in terms of operating revenues, and that's based on the rates that we adjusted this year. Operating expenses. So actually, in the trend line, we went from 1 million to 998, which is good. We started the year at 953, so it's up a little bit. We got some inflationary effects hitting us. And as we look at June a year ago, 934 versus 998 in June. All right, where we are spending on CAPEX year to date. So at the end of June, we're at 24%. It kind of puts us a little bit below where we were last year at 28, pretty much right in line with where we were in 2020 at 24%. We think this is compared to budget, we'll hit 84 versus budget. Last year we were above. And certainly we'll be high, at 84, we'll be certainly higher than where we were in 2020. Okay, now we'll look at suburban wastewater income for the month. $10,000 unfavorable variance, went the other way year to date. For the full year, we'll be down $1.3 million. And that will be mostly on the revenue side. Municipal revenues will be down as a result of some credits making their way into this year. In terms of variances, I mean, we're into decimals here, so we're less than 1,000 across the board on all of them, a total of $10 favorable. So cash flows. They were negative, but better than forecast for the month. Also negative by year to date, we're down by 47,000. And cash flows for the full year, we're saying are going to be down by $530,000 to budget. The variances, again, not much in debt service and financing. Wastewater, again, as I had mentioned during the last session a month ago, we did do some investing, and that has taken some cash out of the picture. But we have about $6 million worth of invested money. So if you looked at all of the numbers on cash, we would be higher. And certainly days cash on hand would be a lot better than the 150 days that we showed even on the metric chart. So the biggest variance on year-to-date cash flows has really been on the CAPEX side, where we kind of spent more than we had thought we were going to spend. Dashboards on suburban wastewater. In this particular time, year-to-date, we're a little bit below the 10.82 target. We think we'll finish at 9.47. You can see the big gap between the 1.20 threshold. So even though it won't be where we thought, it's still pretty good. Year-to-date operating ratio, we're at 1.04 versus 1.1. We think we'll finish at 1.04. So we'll beat the internal target. We'll be a little bit less than the budgeted target. Days cash on hand, 141 141 versus 180, again, talking about, I said 150, it's 141. With the invested balances, we'd be way ahead of the 180. We think just in cash basis only, we'll be at 285, and I'm not thinking that we're gonna have to unwind any of the investments that we made to do that, so. Year-to-date, operating revenues and operating expenses to forecast were pretty much spot on. Year-to-date CAPEX, again, the unfavorable variance in cash flows were at 109 versus 100. Well, look like for the year, we think our operating revenues are gonna be 20 million versus the 21, so that's $1 million plus of lower municipal credits. Operating expenses, about right in line, 295 versus 285. CAPEX, we're 1.8 now versus 1.7, and we think we'll hit 2.4 versus 2.9. And again, cash balance itself, 5.1 versus 5.1. So we're pretty close to forecast. We think we'll get to 10. In terms of operating revenues, we're about a little bit lower than the 1,490 on a moving average compared to May. Compared to the beginning of the year, 1,450 versus 1,544. And then as I compare it to June of last year, 1,586. So we're down a bit in terms of the municipal revenues. Operating expenses, the moving average is 1.6 versus 1.616, so we went up a tiny bit. Compared to the beginning of the year, we're up a little bit, not much, 1.593 versus 1.627, and compared to 1.480 in June to 1.627. Again, we're seeing some inflationary impact right now on some of our operating expenses. And I think that's going to continue out. Maybe we'll get lucky and inflation will peak this year and settle down. So. CAPEX through June, we're at 69%, 64% versus the 51 a year ago and 40%. So we're at our highest trend year to date for June. We think we're going to finish the year at 84. We were above budget last year and 97% in 2020. So actually that's gone down a bit. Okay, on the city side, income, only minus $31 in month income. Year-to-date income is 5.3 thousand. In income full year, we're 3 million versus 2.1. So nice variance on income for the full year. Year-to-date, we're down mostly in operating expenses. So net income, variances to forecast are minus on operating expenses. And that's the biggest variance there. Cash flows for the month, we're up by $7,000. It's good. Year to date, we're favorable by 119,000. And where we think for the year, we're going to be 536,000. Most of that is due to better net income. There really isn't any other variances besides cash flow from operations. Nope, we're good. Debt service coverage ratio, 2.15 versus a target of 1.67 and threshold. So we think we'll finish at 1.86. So that'll come down a little bit, but that'll still be better than our targets. Operating ratio, almost 2 versus 1.6. We think we'll finish at 1.66, which will be good. Days cash on hand, 254.3 versus the 180, and we think we'll finish the year at 313. Operating revenues pretty much in line with forecast. Even operating expenses pretty much in line with forecast, and CAPEX in line with forecast as well. So Looking at operating revenues for the year, we think we'll hit 50.7 versus 50.9. That's not much of a variance, a little bit unfavorable. Expenses, 30.5 versus 31.5, so that'll make up some of that difference. CAPEX, 10.6 versus 11.3. And the cash, unrestricted cash balance will be almost 17 million. It's a little bit less than where we are forecast, but we think we'll be at almost $21 million at the end of the year in unrestricted cash. In terms of operating revenue trends, 4041 versus 4002, so went up a little bit as compared to the beginning of the year at 3825. That's good, and compared to last year, 3672, so that's a good trend. And on the expense side, we actually went down on a moving average basis compared to May, and a little bit up compared to December, and actually down compared to June of last year. CAPEX wise, June we're at 30%, last year we were at 31, 2020 we're at 23, so about in line with last year. We think we'll finish at 95 versus where we were in previous year at 85 and then 63, so we'll be close to budget. So if you take a look at all the good, not so good, nothing's really bad, to be honest with you. I mean, suburban water, we hit 13 out of the 14 points, so that's pretty good. Suburban wastewater, I think we had 8. This one's kind of hovered anywhere between 7 and 8 right now, and 2 of them already I got to take out of the picture because of the way that we did investments. So really is 9, so it's really not as bad as it looks with the red ones up there associated with investing. And the city hit it 14, so. What's next is we'll take another look at the 2022 forecast. We'll start looking at the operating side. We'll start looking at the capital side. And then I know the staff has been already starting on numbers for the 2023 budget. So we'll be rolling all that out as we get into July and August. So, any questions on the financial results?
It's good.
All right, thanks, Ed. Any comments? All right. Moving on. Monthly system operations overview. Digital package, page 29. So the final last sheet in our packet.
Thanks, Brian. So in front of you, you have the monthly operations report for June 2022. As we get to the heat of the summer, you'll notice a lot of the water production has gone up. And that's in all of our systems, really. In the Central Lehigh division, a lot of that has been made up through well production rather than the feed from Allentown. Wastewater, pretty straightforward. We're in line with what we typically see around this time of the year. Precipitation was 3.92 inches in June, and this was really towards the beginning of the month rather than the end. We did not receive any NOVs, however, we did have 1 SSO, and that was at the pretreatment plant, which was really from what I'm going to call a slug of rags, which clogged the bar screen and pump area, allowing an overflow. We had 2 main breaks or leak repairs in Allentown and 1 in Suburban, which we're going to touch on in a few seconds. And no injury reports, which I'm glad to report once again. Do you want to touch on the first main leak?
Sure. The big one here, it's mentioned under significant repairs, is the bridge construction on Lehigh and MLK in downtown Allentown. The construction crew ignored the 811 markings and tried to drive a pylon through our 36-inch steel water main. They hit the top of it and thought they hit shale and went full send and really did a number on it, but we were lucky it was our steel main and not a cast. If it was cast, it would have just shattered. So ultimately, Jason Gruber and his crew in the city were able to isolate it. By the grace of all things holy, it was in a spot that allowed us to isolate that section and then push primary usage through a 20-inch bypass to the east side reservoir. They cut out a section about the size of these computer monitors, which is about how big the head of the drill was that they were using to drill for the pylons. So big kudos to Jason and his team for isolating that quickly and avoiding a huge crisis, because if that thing sprung, it would have gone down into the river, literally 25 feet from the river. It could have been really ugly. So they literally drove over the markings for 811.
Is there a penalty for that?
Well, they're paying for it. Penalty, I'm not sure. I don't know where that goes from here. They claimed they thought it made a 90-degree turn to go under the
You
creek.
say they're paying for it, meaning what?
The contractor that hit it is responsible for all costs involved. And it was through J.O. Bradley, one of our best contractors, so they'll do direct bill. They'll work with them to get it all paid out. So it didn't cost LCA anything aside from some manpower hours to make sure that it was properly fixed and subsequently repaired. So we had no loss of pressure, no loss of system. Guys did a great job.
So they ignored the one call marking. Is that it?
Yeah. Yeah, and because of where it is, there's huge riprap rocks down there. So they got those blue plastic 3-foot pylon ones, and you can see there's a picture of it where the guy drove the big drill right across the top of them. It was right, I mean, it couldn't have been better in line. They hit the pipe right at 12 o'clock. So.
Was the one call marking right on?
Dead on. I mean, dead on. Even if you don't account for the 48 inches either way, it was dead on. Right on the center top of the pipe, so. Crisis averted, but kudos to the guys down in the city, the DNC crew again.
So pretty sure they have to submit a report to the PUC. There's a damage prevention committee, and they might, down the road at some point, get fined by them.
So there is a mechanism to fine.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, because there's reports that have to be filed for that
Yeah.
whole incident, so.
Yeah, I mean, they knew it happened, and we were on site within 20 minutes, and we had them leave the drill in spot in situ to make sure that if you pull it out, it's like getting shot with an arrow. They say leave it in until you get to the hospital. So we were able to isolate and get the system shut down. They did a great job. Thank you, Andrew.
No, thanks, Chris. I mentioned about the SSO, which was about 300 gallons that was leaked out of the headworks. We also had 2 boil water advisories that occurred in June. The first one being for the CLD, which was specifically in the Farview Farms development. This was from 6:15 to 6:17, and this had to deal with one of the line breaks in the suburban division, which was actually caused by some pump troubleshooting at the Kohler pump station. And then the second boil water advisory was at the end of June from 6:30 to 7:02 at the Pine Lakes division. And this was due to a generator failure. So the generator turned on, but the actual transfer of power did not occur. That was due to a high voltage alarm. And when we actually tore apart the generator, it turns out that it looks like there was damage to one of the main control boards, likely due to some type of lightning strike or something in the area, actually the week beforehand. So unfortunately, the generator ran, it just did not transfer, and we had no system pressure. Anyone have any specific questions about any of that?
Is there any update on the Sand Spring plant and getting that operating properly?
Yes, there is somewhat of an update. We have made great headway as far as clarity and performance of the plant. Suspended solids, BOD, ammonia are all actually in a very good spot, knock on wood. However, there are still elevated flows coming into the plant and leaving the plant, and that does cause difficulties with permitting because you probably know more than anyone, but that NEPTIS permits have actual concentration limits, which we are, as of right now, meeting. However, there's also loading limits, which basically takes into account your concentration, the flow of the plant, and then an 8.34 point calculation number. And with the flows exceeding the plant design, we're having extreme difficulties meeting the actual load and concentrations. So there's progress, but still not to the point where we're satisfied with what's going on down there.
You still haven't figured out where the extra flow is coming from?
Unfortunately not. It's frustrating because it's a small plant, it's a small collection system. There's really not too much going on, but that also adds to the difficulty, because if you pop open a manhole and look at the flow going through, it's so small that just an inch or two of level could mean a 25% increase in that system. And so it's difficult to actually differentiate how much flow is going through.
It couldn't possibly be I&I somewhere?
Find it.
So in other words, the idea is not to really, we'll have to just deal with the flow that's coming in. Try to make changes to the.
I don't have a good answer for you, because that's not the end game. Realistically, the plant's designed for 35,000 gallons per day, and we have been over that fairly consistently. And that would then take into account Chapter 94 reporting, where you're basically in hydraulic overload of the facility. So depending on how that goes with the DEP, we may have to take additional steps, but I'm not exactly positive where that's going to head at this point.
In other words, you think we won't be able to reduce flows, we're just gonna have to deal with them?
I'm hoping we can reduce flows, but honestly, I don't have a good lead on where those flows are coming from to say that we will be able to do that.
Thanks.
Okay, any other questions? All right, thank you for the report. All right, next, staff comments.
I have nothing additional. Thank you.
Solicitor comments.
I have nothing to report to the board. It's certainly nice to see everybody, particularly my classmate. So it's good to see you.
Thank you. Nice seeing you here. Let's see, any public comments on any issues that they want to discuss?
No, thanks, Brian.
No, thanks.
Okay, thanks, Jenny and Brian. All right, we are going to go into adjournment. We do have an executive session. The information for attending that executive session has been sent out by Liesl this morning at 10:24. Check your emails. And it's now 1:30, so let's do that at 1:45. Liesl is raising her pen. Go ahead.
Just want to clarify for the record, it is executive session related to personnel.
All right, I forgot that. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
All right, so we are adjourned, and then executive session will occur at 1:45. Thank you very much. See you there.
Thank you.